Before we get into Tide Pod today, I want to give a big thank you to our brand new sponsor. Super excited, Autograph. Big news, everybody. We're excited to be working with Autograph, co-founded by the GOAT himself, Tom Brady. Autograph is where real Alabama fans get unreal rewards. It's the first app to track and reward fans for loving what they love most, turning passion into access and experience. Founded on the belief that devotion should be rewarded and the future of fandom belongs to the fans. They've been sending true fans to the biggest games in college basketball for just $16. Yes, $16. As we gear up for football season, this means you can score discounted tickets to marquee matchups. Scan the code on screen now to download the free Autograph app in the Apple App Store and use referral code TIDEI, TIDEI. That's referral code TIDEI, and see you at the game. Welcome back to Tide Pod. Today is Tuesday, March 26th. And on today's show, Alabama basketball is rolling into the Sweet 16. Tide Illustrated managing editor Tony Sakalis and I were both watching this game. Tony, the Crimson Tide took down now Grand Canyon and Charleston, two mid-major teams, but they're going to their second straight Sweet 16 under NATO. It's a good time for Alabama basketball right now. Maybe not the place a lot of Alabama fans thought they'd reach, given the last four games of the SEC season. But what were your thoughts on this last game against Grand Canyon? How Alabama gritted it out to reach their second straight Sweet 16?
A little bit of a tough watch at times, wouldn't you say? I mean, this one was kind of ugly. Yeah, maybe if you like defensive basketball, but there was a time when I think Alabama missed 13, 14 straight shots. So they really needed their defense to stand up. I think you saw a couple of players really kind of come into their own, especially in the second half. I really like the way Nick Pringle stepped up. And then obviously all the attention has been on Mo Diabate and just the spark he provided. I know Grand Canyon kind of after the game said that, they're pretty much one rebound away from winning. It doesn't sound like that when you look at the scoreboard, but that rebound and putback and three-point play that Mo Diabate had when Alabama was it seemed like everything was going away from Alabama. They were trailing at the time. They had blown a big lead, they had blown, a substantial lead in the second half. Nothing was falling. They were getting turnovers. And then Mo Diabate just stepped up and provided them that boost. And he was huge. And he's a guy that hasn't really played that much this season. He's been kind of sparingly. He's a guy that provides some defense. He's very limited on the offensive side of the ball. It's probably a big reason why he hasn't been playing. But they needed him and they needed his defense. And they're going to need everything they can get moving forward when they're playing number one seed North Carolina coming up.
Yeah, the Tar Heels faced off against Alabama in a thriller last season. Obviously, most players from that Alabama team are gone. North Carolina still has its two best players from that team are still there, Armando Bacot and RJ Davis. So Osel, I'm sure, be rewatching the film of that. He said he was going to be watching a lot of what North Carolina's been doing recently here in preparation for that game. They get a week off to prepare for that as they head to Los Angeles. Tony, we can talk more on the bench players in a second, but I think you have to write the obvious headlines at times, and the man responsible for much of Alabama's success all season long, and of course in these first two tournaments, Mark Sears. I mean, my goodness, his first two games, he had a 30-point game against Charleston, and then 26 and 12 rebounds against the Antelopes. Now just 16 points away from the single season scoring record for Alabama. I mean, he's just been fantastic to watch. And if the country didn't already know it after that second consensus second team All-American nod, they sure do know it now.
Yeah, I mean, he's an upset away from being a historic tournament run kind of guy. I mean, when you start talking about the Kemba Walkers and Steph Currys and I think that he's been outstanding. Maybe they don't have like the win in the tournament to give him the national attention, but if he does this again and they beat North Carolina, you're gonna hear Mark Sears' name, on all the channels nonstop. He's just been absolutely, outstanding. I mean, look, it's not even the 30 points. It's the other stuff that he did too. The rebounds and the assists he's had in both games. I mean, he's been outstanding for Alabama, and they wouldn't, we talked about Mo Diabate, we talked about um, Nick Pringle, but they wouldn't be there if it wasn't for Mark Sears. I mean, he had 26 points, 12 rebounds, 6 assists against the Grand Canyon. So this is best game in a Crimson Tide uniform. It's pretty obvious there. It's 5 of 11 from 3. He also had 3 steals. I mean, so this is a guy that's like doing it on both ends. I think Mark Sears has the possibility of being the best Alabama player ever if he wants to decide to return. I'm sure there'll be, especially with a big tournament run, right? There might be some people in his ear about the NBA, and I don't know what his opportunities will be, and that'll be a decision for another time. But he comes back, he'll have a chance of being Alabama's highest ever scorer. He's probably going to get the single season record this year. Like you said, he's 16 points away. Can't see, even in a loss to North Carolina, I can't see him not getting 16 points in his last game. So we'll see how that goes. But Mark Sears, man, that guy has been just a phenomenal player for Alabama the last 2 years. But really, just he's stepping up at the right time as well.
Yeah, I think it almost goes underappreciated just because Alabama fans are so used to just game in and game out, 20 points and 10 assists or almost 10 assists. He's been spectacular. You look ahead to North Carolina now. You know what you're going to get from Sears. You're hoping it's going to be at least 16 points for his own sake and maybe the narrative's sake. Who else needs to step up here in this team, Tony? I'm looking at a Grant Nelson, who I think is combined for 6 points and 2 rebounds here in 2 starts in the NCAA tournament. Aaron Estrada won the hard hat against Grand Canyon. Hasn't been scoring necessarily to the same rate as someone who's been Alabama's second leading scorer all season. We mentioned the bench putting up a big shift, but I think you'd have to expect maybe a little bit more from the starters here than maybe Alabama got against Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I think you're going to need everything you can to beat this North Carolina team. But I think when you look at it, some of the players you mentioned, Grant Nelson's got to show up. I mean, he's really been, 3 points in 16 minutes against Grand Canyon, 3 points in 15 minutes against College of Charleston. And he had 4 fouls against Grand Canyon, but only 1 foul against looking at it now. Yeah. 1 foul against Charleston. So he didn't really play against Charleston just because he wasn't, producing. So you mentioned North Carolina's bigs. You're going to need guys that can come in, and kind of combat that in some way. So he's going to have to stay out of foul trouble, which has been a problem for him, but also he's going to have to just provide some more impact in the game, whether it's points, whether it's, stepping up a little bit on defense. I think he's going to have to be huge. Nick Pringle's a guy we talked about, he's done a good job of staying out of foul trouble and really providing some defense down low. They're going to need that. I think, be nice if somebody, like one of the younger guys, maybe Sam Walters or Jaron Stevenson, or maybe even Mo Diabate, maybe he continues that run from last game. But having somebody have a moment, maybe like Mo did, where if Jaron Stevenson can come in and play some, decent defense and provide some size, especially if Grant Nelson's struggling, and then hit a few threes or something like that. Not even a few, like hit 1 or 2 threes. I think that could be big, Same, you could kind of say the same thing with Sam Walters. He's not as much of a 4 as he is more of like a 3 or a huge 2, but somebody like him, just shoot a big 3. You mentioned Estrada. Estrada is one of those guys that he can be frustrating when you watch him, because you look at his stats and they're great. He's had a bunch of assists, he's had rebounds, he gets some points, but he also misses a ton of shots. And he's gonna, you can't get into these funks where you're just putting up bad shots or you're missing, or he's got to be a little bit more efficient when when it comes to scoring. But I think he's a player that, you're going to need that kind of triple double kind of guy, or not necessarily saying he's going to need a triple double, but you're going to need those guys that can get rebounds, can get assists. So that's all going to be important. But I basically just listed out the whole entire roster. Maybe I haven't mentioned Rylan Griffin, but I mean, shoot, that would help as well, but basically everyone just kind of contributing in their own way. But I think probably the biggest thing from what I said is just having some unexpected players step up in the moments that they're called on. That's what happened with Mo Diabate. there'll be moments. I don't know what they'll be, but there'll be a moment when a younger guy can step up, and he's gonna have to take care of business in that time.
Yeah, no doubt. There are some narratives with that. I mean, Sam Walters, you saw his threes against Florida that kind of lifted Alabama in that game. Should have probably lost that at home if it wasn't for him. You've got Jaron Stevenson, little bit of a homecoming for him. It's not necessarily in North Carolina, or well, it's not North Carolina, but playing against the school he grew up near, recruited him really hard. His mom played there, so you've got maybe a chip on his shoulder to kind of show out against one of the schools that was targeting him. Diabate continuing to just dominate. Him and Mohamed Wagi celebrating Ramadan. I'm really not sure how you play sports at that kind of a level when you don't eat or drink all day, but it seems to unlock something for those two guys. And I think you make the point with Grant Nelson. I look at someone as Latrell Reitzel, who obviously seems to have the worst luck with getting hit in the head from anybody I've ever seen. Nate Oates said after the game, it seems like he'll be okay. Gave them 5 threes against Charleston. What he does and is able to do will be huge. But yeah, I do want to ask you, with more regard to North Carolina, what do you remember about covering that overtime thriller? It was 4 overtimes. Mark Sears, I believe, played 55 minutes in that game. They basically played a whole essentially other half. It was a thriller. There are 3 players, like I mentioned, from that Carolina team that are back, Armando Bacot and RJ Davis, who, if even you're a casual college basketball fan, you know who those two are. And then they have a bench guard named Seth Trimble. Other than that, everyone's squad is pretty new, but still some familiarity there with North Carolina.
Yeah, another thing on North Carolina before we get into that is they've got Cormac Ryan, and you talked about Latrell Reitzel, and he's had some of the best perimeter defense. We all know Latrell Reitzel for his scoring, but Cormac Ryan had like 29 points and just lit up Alabama from deep when they lost to Notre Dame a couple years ago in the first round of the tournament. And so now he's with North Carolina, and I think that that's a guy that Alabama is very familiar with as well, even though he's not part of North Carolina. And it's somebody that Baycock is kind of the guy that when you think about North Carolina, that's the guy, and he was big. When you look at his role on the team, and then also Alabama struggles with bigs, you could think, oh man, that's going to be definitely the guy to circle. But then Ryan, I mean, the way he lit up Alabama from 3, if he can do that again, that'll be a nightmare for Alabama. But just about that North Carolina game, I have to go back and really watch it again. But I remember Alabama had a couple of opportunities to end it, in overtime, and Javon Quinterly just, I think he got blocked going to the rim once, and I think I remember thinking that he was playing a little bit of a hero ball, but then also he had a good game too. There's, like I said, there's not a lot of people from that game, but that was a big win for that team. That was a weird Alabama, that was a weird moment for Alabama, but I think that was kind of a good point in the season and stuff. And so for the players that played in that game, for the Mark Sears and stuff, maybe that will help. It is kind of a new, there's kind of new rosters now. So I don't know how much that will help, but I think that it at least gives Oates and the rest of the staff some film to kind of to look at, and maybe drop some things, maybe get some firsthand, you get to see how North Carolina operates versus Alabama and how it operates, even if it's with different personnel. You get to see that from a recent game. So I think that'll be important.
Yeah, Nate Oates has said, his team seems to be really honing in on playing for each other. That moody that they always talk about, with having joy through other people's success. You saw that with Mohamed Diabate, and it seems like it's starting to click at the right time for Alabama. The question is, can they make that jump? They've played 10 teams that remain in the tournament field in the last 2 seasons, 5 of them this year alone. If they beat North Carolina, they'll face either Clemson or Arizona, 2 teams that beat the Crimson Tide here earlier this season. So definitely exciting. And Tony, before we segue, what do you think prediction-wise? Does Alabama, you feel free to do a score if you would like, but does Alabama reach the Elite Eight and get the chance at a rematch with either the Tigers or the Wildcats?
It's just so hard to pick them over, a 1 seed. I think Alabama certainly can. I'd have to pick North Carolina. I don't really know a score. Um, I just don't think you're going to hold Alabama under 80, but then so maybe I'll go 87, 83 or something like that. North Carolina. Maybe Alabama fans won't get too mad at me because I'm not great at predictions. I predicted Alabama to get 100 points last game. They they ended up with 72. So I'm not the best at this prediction thing, but I think it's going to be tough for North Carolina or to beat North Carolina. I do think that Alabama has a team that can beat anyone in the nation. I think they're going to have to be able to shoot. They haven't been consistent enough at shooting, and I think that, you can play defense, but really when it comes down to these, knocking off these number 1 seeds, knocking off, a number 2 seed in Arizona, if they're going to have to do that, they're going to have to really shoot. And you're going to need some special things to happen. We'll see if those things happen. I mean, Alabama seems to have some good mojo heading around into this part of, it seems like the momentum's starting to build rather. And so that's important too. So we'll just have to see. But I think that, especially when you look at what North Carolina can do down low, it's going to be a tough game to predict for Alabama.
I think you might be sound on that one. Alabama faces North Carolina. Tip-off is slated currently for 8:39 local time or Central Time. We all know how that goes. They'll finish after the conclusion of the Clemson-Arizona game. So chances are that one maybe gets pushed back. Let's segue to football now, Tony, and look at some spring camp stuff. Spring practice is heating up. You're getting a lot more used to being on the inside looking in, so to speak, at spring practice. And Alabama has its first scrimmage coming up here on the 28th. We've talked a bit about on previous shows what we think or what you've been noticing and what's been the things to keep an eye on as spring practice continues. What are you looking for here from this first scrimmage here in the next 2 days?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to see the scrimmage, so it's going to be a lot of hearsay. But I'm looking to for validation on some of the things that we have seen / heard. So you have two players in the secondary, and Red Morgan and Xavier Brown, who are kind of stepping into first team roles at the moment. How do they perform? It's one thing to do that in practice. How do they perform when it comes to a game like setting? And I'd be really interested to see if the lights get a little brighter for them, if they get a little bit more nervous, if they make mistakes. It's kind of the same thing when you look at other positions, offensive line at the tackle position. It's so great for Alabama that they got Caden Proctor back, but it'll be interesting to see how some of those younger guys do, because I don't think the competition for that right side's over yet. You've got a Wilkin Formby, a Miles McVay. They're going to push with Elijah Pritchett. So I think that will be important for those three guys. This scrimmage will be to kind of keep that momentum and to really create that battle heading into the fall when you add Caden Proctor into the mix. And then I'm just interested too. There's some players that we haven't really seen. Whether it's a Yanzi Pierre, whether it's a Keon Keeley, Keon Keeley's now in the bandit role. Be interesting to see how he handles that. And then Yanzi Pierre, I think when you look at that Wolf role, or which essentially the Jack linebacker role, you got Quindarius Robinson, but I'd be interested to see some of the people behind him. So, I think the one I'm the most interested in seeing is Yanzi Pierre. Quay Russell would be another one that some of those guys we didn't get to see last year. And then finally, I think, somebody like Caleb Odom, how is he going to switch over to wide receiver? How much of an impact can he make? He could be a huge X factor. He's 6'5" as a wide receiver. That's if he can move and play the wide receiver position well enough to be an impact this season, that opens up a whole new box of ideas for Nick Sheridan and the offense to kind of work with. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, you talk about some of those positional, kind of battles. Players, you don't really know what their positions are yet. That feels like it's becoming a little bit more common with some of the younger guys they're bringing in. That even ties into recruiting, which we'll finish off with in a sec. But Tony, talk about a couple of things you've written on Tide Illustrated recently with, the edge rusher position, some of that stuff that you just want fans to keep an eye on and should go read.
Yeah, one person I talked to was Jamarian Latham, who, you talk about the new roles on defense. That bandit role, it seems like it was created for him. being around 275 pounds. I think that role, he was kind of a tweener kind of guy. He was a guy that was kind of small to be a defensive tackle, but then big to be the edge rusher that Alabama's used to, with like the Will Anderson or the Dallas Turner or something like that. So he, in this new role, he's at 6'3", 273 pounds. I think that's that's going to be the heavy end kind of position at the Bandit. I think he can be an interesting player. I think he's going to be nimble now enough. You look at him, he doesn't look. He looks, I wouldn't say lean, but he looks like he could be agile. He can move if he needs to drop back and cover in the flats. He could probably do that. He can chase down a running back. I think he's a guy that not a lot of people are talking about, but I think at that Bandit role he'll be pretty good. So I talk about that. I mentioned Yancey Pierre, and I mentioned some of those guys at the Wolf position. I talked about that. We'll have a lot more stuff on the offensive side of the ball today when we talk to the offensive players after practice. Obviously, we're recording this on a Tuesday, so that'll be interesting to see how they're gearing up heading into the scrimmage as well. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff. Dean has a story on the secondary and Devontae Smith saying that the secondary has really stepped up. He's a guy that you can't forget about in the secondary too. I know Red Morgan's doing really well at the star position, or I guess we're calling it Husky now. I got to do the language right, but I think Devontae Smith's a guy that once he kind of progresses and gets back from injury, he can fight for a role there too. So there's a lot of shuffling in and out, and there's a lot of I think it's good. Depth is probably something that Alabama would be worried about heading into the spring camp, and it seems like some of the younger guys are stepping up, which will really help regardless of whether they win jobs or not. I think, just from a depth standpoint, that will be huge.
Yeah, go check all that stuff out on Tide Illustrated. You mentioned, players, all this with players switching positions and the young players really stepping up. Alabama continues to kind of load up here on the recruiting trail, Tony. The Crimson Tide got their 8th recruit here on Monday, Luke Metz, a linebacker from Georgia. Yes, another linebacker. That makes 3, at least according to us, 3 linebackers. And based on the way they've been recruiting, I don't expect all those guys to play linebacker. But Luke Metz, Abdul Sanders, Daryl Johnson, all 3 commits have come in the last 6 days for Alabama. We talked about it last time, Tony, but they are red hot on the recruiting trail. And what do you make kind of this sort of defense focused base to get these commits at least to start as we roll here into April?
Well, if you look at that inside linebacker position, it's not really too much of a surprise why they would target it, because you got Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell who could go pro after this year, and then you've got Justin Jefferson that I always want to call him Jordan Jefferson, but you've got him that can that's going to run out of eligibility as well. So you're really going to have to restock the center of your defense, and that's so important. So adding some guys there, I'm not sure if these guys are going to step in and be starters their first year at Alabama, but just reloading the depth of that position will be very important. And I think just from a recruiting standpoint in general, Kalen DeBoer's answered a lot of questions. Whether or not it's not all these guys are 5-star caliber guys. They're not all rivals 100 guys, but he's bringing in quality players, 4-star players to Alabama. He's doing it, both with people in the South and with people out West. And so I think he's kind of proven he can do it all. I think it's really interesting when you look at, the attention they're putting on social media and just kind of like you're getting a new, younger vibe. People like to work in absolutes. Just because Alabama is kind of using a younger, more modern, maybe not as rigid vibe, or kind of I don't know, like mantra or whatever. I don't think that necessarily means that what Nick Saban was doing was wrong. I don't necessarily think that Alabama is going to be better now doing this shift than they were under Saban. But I do think that there's some advantages into how it works, how it's going to work with recruiting, the I guess the ability to interact with kids and reach them on their level and kind of sell the program more. You're going to have to do that a lot more because you can't just stick Nick Saban in front of them and say, hey, play in front of the best college football coach ever, and I think you're going to have to do a lot more to reach kids and to kind of sell them a little bit more. You don't have this, icon. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from Kalen DeBoer either, but you just don't have this god of the sport there sitting there for everyone that, is just so familiar and so in awe with him. So I like what Kalen DeBoer is doing. I like what his staff's doing, and I like the direction that the program's going in. I'm not necessarily surprised with the success that they've had, just because I think they're setting things up the way that they have to, and the way that what Alabama's going to have to do now to survive in today's college football landscape. I think they're doing everything that you would hope and expect that they do. So we'll see how this all pans out. It's really exciting to look at, when things are going with recruiting and you've got all this positive energy in spring camp. Let's see how it looks on the football field. But for right now, I think that Alabama, certainly there's a lot of optimism around the program because it seems like things are heading in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely a lot of optimism. My favorite thing is the coaches who just take the videos at practice and say the same thing that, we're gonna have to put you in pads and get you out here. That's always seems like
Yeah,
the
but
final
can you
message from Dale.
imagine like a coach doing that during the Nick Saban era? I mean, that was just,
Right.
I don't know what, you would hear Nick Saban yelling at him in the background to get back, get his ass back on back to work. So it's not just Kalen DeBoer. Like that, the video you're referring to is Kane Womack. I mean, he's a real high energy guy. And from a recruiting standpoint, he's a guy that really knows the South as well. So that's going to help Kalen and some of the, Nick Sheridans, Jamarcus Shepard, some of those guys that are coming from the West Coast. I think it's going to really help to have some of these, Christian Robinson's recruited in the South, Kane Womack's recruited in the South. So you got a good enough mix, and it seems to be working really well for Alabama.
No doubt, no doubt. Before we go, Tony, it seems like college football is getting shaken up every day in terms of the changing playoffs and all these things. For Alabama, though, it's going to see the same opponents in the SEC in 2025. That was happened in the last few days. The SEC is going to keep its 8-game schedule for at least one more season, keep the same opponents in conference play, meaning the Tide's road games this season will be at home and vice versa. Which means at home next year, they will play LSU, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. Road games against Auburn, Georgia, Missouri, and South Carolina. What do you make of the 8-game schedule getting kept for another season in Alabama? Doesn't seem like too bad of a draw. Obviously, a trip to Jordan-Hare is always chaotic, but what's your take here on this 8-game schedule and next season looking way ahead?
That trip to Sanford Stadium is also going to be pretty chaotic too. So there's a lot. It's going to be a tough schedule. I think it's a little bit more manageable now to have a tough schedule with the playoff expanding. So it's kind of weird to say it, but you can drop some of these games and still make the playoff. I don't think that necessarily needs to be the mindset that Alabama has going into this, but it's going to be tough to run the gauntlet here. I'm excited personally just about going to Georgia. That's one of the SEC schools that I haven't been to. I joined the beat in 2016. They haven't played at Georgia since 2015. There was that rain delay game. Interestingly enough, that's the year that Alabama had lost to Ole Miss early, and it was the first time in forever that the Alabama wasn't favored in a game heading into a game, and then they beat Georgia. They went on to win the national title that year. So that was that's a classic game. So if it's anything like that game, Alabama fans should be happy because they pretty much blew out Georgia in the rain. But just another marquee matchup between those two programs will be fun. Interested to see Oklahoma come to Alabama. You're also going to have like some of the non-conference games too, right? So like Wisconsin's going to come to Alabama. You'll have Oklahoma at Alabama. There'll be some fun games for Crimson Tide fans to see in Bryant Denny. That's the cool part about this. As far as like the 8-game, 9-game schedule, I think this just kind of kicks it down the road a little bit more. I still wouldn't be shocked if the SEC goes to a 9-game schedule, especially since the college football playoffs going to be expanding again to 14. So we'll just see how that goes. I mean, shoot, we don't even know who's going to be in the SEC in 2 years. They might be even more add-ons. So but it's interesting. My biggest takeaway is just that trip to Georgia. I like that. I know you, a Mizzou grad, will get to go back. You'll get to go back home to Missouri, or back, to your alma mater in Missouri. So that will be kind of a neat game for you. But what game, I guess, is that the game that you're the most excited about on the schedule, or what?
I am looking forward to going back. I've never been in the press box at Faurot Field. It's not the most impressive by SEC standards stadium wise. I won't I won't be too much of a homer there, but that should be a fun game. And if Missouri's continuing up where they've been, that should be a good game as well. Of course, they play in Tuscaloosa in 2024. LSU, I think, coming to Alabama will be fun as well. I'm excited for that game in Death Valley in 2024, just because of what I've heard about that stadium. I have not been personally to a lot of SEC stadiums, and I have been to Samford, but that was for a Missouri-Georgia game, and that was much less of a contest than I think Alabama would be, which I think, that'll make the Samford environment more fun.
Is this the year that they're going to Tallahassee this year or next year, right? Like
yes. So that's another
yeah.
one.
So I mean, like all of this, so you got the trip to Georgia, and you also got a trip to Florida State. That'll be interesting. I think that's just interesting from a coaching standpoint. So I think that would be kind of a fun one. Talk about stadiums that I haven't been to that I'd want to. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see the flaming spear on the field. I know that has a name. I can't think of it right now, but yeah, I'm excited. As another classic. I mean, shoot, that year is going to be such a fun year just for atmospheres. Between the hedges. Florida State. Having Oklahoma and Wisconsin coming to Alabama. That would just be really fun.
Plenty of exciting games for the Crimson Tide fans to circle on their calendar, and a lot of challenging ones for DeBoer as well. That'll wrap it up here for another Tide Pod little Alabama briefing for you guys. I will be in LA. We'll have updates all on the site and on YouTube for everybody for Alabama's hopeful run beyond the Sweet 16. We'll see how it goes here against the Tar Heels of North Carolina. But until next time, take it easy, and we'll see you guys on another episode.